They thought she was just a waitress with a small-town accent, until her next words, in flawless Mandarin, shattered a billionaire's pride and changed her destiny forever. If this story touches you, don't forget to subscribe for more healing journeys like this one. The Palm Court of the Plaza Hotel had always been a theater of power. Beneath the chandeliers that shimmered like frozen starlight, magnates sealed billion-dollar mergers, political donors whispered into the ears of senators, and visiting dignitaries measured the strength of America not in weapons but in wine lists. On that late autumn evening, New York's elite gathered once again, gold watches flashing, laughter thick with entitlement, the scent of wealth clinging to every polished glass and polished shoe. Jonathan Blake sat at the head of the long mahogany table, a man in his early 40s whose name was etched into the skyline itself. Blake Global owned office towers that touched the clouds, data centers that pulsed beneath the Hudson, and investments that stretched from Silicon Valley to Shanghai. He was a man who had learned early that power was a performance, and humiliation was a weapon. To his right sat Daniel Chen, the billionaire founder of Han Innovations, one of the fastest-growing technology firms in China. Chen was a man of restraint, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, every gesture deliberate, every word weighed before release. Negotiations tonight would decide the future of artificial intelligence cooperation between New York and Beijing, an agreement rumored to be worth billions. And hovering quietly at the far side of the table, tray balanced in her hands, was Naomi Carter. At 28, Naomi had learned to carry herself with invisibility. She wore the starched white blouse and fitted black vest of the plaza's waitstaff, her blonde hair pulled back into a neat bun, her eyes lowered in professional submission. To most at the table, she was no more than a shadow, there to refill their champagne flutes, clear away their bone china plates, and vanish without voice. But to Jonathan Blake, she was something else that night. Entertainment. The first barb came casually, laced with a smile that could charm investors yet slice through bone. "Tell me, Miss Carter, was it?" His voice rang out loud enough for Chen and the other executives to hear. Naomi looked up, startled, clutching her tray a little tighter. "Yes, sir. Carter." He let the name roll on his tongue as if testing its worth. "From the way you said, sir, I'd guess you're not a New Yorker. Kentucky, Alabama, somewhere with more barns than skyscrapers." A ripple of laughter spread around the table. Naomi felt heat climb her neck, but she kept her tone steady. "I'm from Tennessee." Blake leaned back in his chair, lips curling. "Tennessee? Well, that explains it. My grandfather used to say accents like that were fine for gospel choirs and fried chicken recipes, but not for boardrooms. Don't you agree, Mr. Chen?" Chen's expression was unreadable, though a slight crease formed between his brows. The laughter returned, sharper this time. Naomi stood frozen, her tray steady, her pride trembling. She had endured slights before, dismissed as a girl from the South, overlooked as just another waitress. But something in Blake's smirk pierced deeper than usual, as though he needed her humiliation to affirm his supremacy. Inside her chest, a quiet storm began to stir. She thought of her grandmother Evelyn waiting for her back in Harlem, joints aching from arthritis, yet always reminding Naomi, "Education is a treasure no one can steal." She thought of her years at Georgetown, the nights spent in Beijing mastering Mandarin so perfectly that even professors mistook her for a native. She thought of the sacrifices, the scholarships, the part-time jobs, the endless hours of study that had brought her to this moment, and she thought, enough. Blake raised his glass, clearly savoring his stage. "So, Miss Carter, tell us, what's the most expensive drink you've ever served? Champagne for a hedge fund wedding? Bourbon for a country ball?" The words were meant as a final blow, but when Naomi opened her mouth, it was not English that spilled out. It was Mandarin, crisp and exact, carrying the polished cadence of Beijing itself. "Sir, if you believe accent defines intelligence, you will never understand true power." The room fell into stunned silence. Glasses halted mid-air. Forks clinked back onto porcelain. Jonathan Blake's smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of disbelief. Even Daniel Chen, the master of composure, raised his brows in surprise. Naomi continued, her voice unwavering, her Mandarin flawless. She referenced classical idioms. To do a good job, one must first sharpen one's tools. Her words slicing through the smoke of mockery with the precision of a scalpel. For the first time that evening, she was not invisible. Chen leaned forward slightly, studying her as though a hidden manuscript had suddenly been revealed. The executives exchanged glances, realizing they were witnessing not a waitress's outburst, but the revelation of a scholar. Blake tried to recover, chuckling awkwardly. "Well, well, seems our server has more tricks than I thought." But the tremor in his tone betrayed him. Naomi set down the tray carefully, her eyes meeting his without flinching. She dipped her head respectfully toward Daniel Chen, then stepped back. The room buzzed with whispers, the atmosphere forever altered. For Jonathan Blake, it was the first crack in his armor. For Naomi Carter, it was the first glimpse of a destiny she had nearly buried beneath aprons and empty plates. And as the chandeliers above flickered against the marble columns of the plaza, a new game had begun, one where the rules of class, language, and power would soon be rewritten. Harlem had a rhythm unlike anywhere else in New York. By day, the streets hummed with the sound of delivery trucks, children's laughter spilling from schoolyards, and the warm chatter of neighbors leaning out of windows. By night, the hum softened into gospel choirs echoing from churches and the low brass of jazz slipping from small bars tucked between bodegas. It was a neighborhood of resilience, of stories carried in brick and brownstone, of lives stitched together with endurance and grace. Naomi Carter returned here every evening, after hours of carrying trays under chandeliers and enduring the sharp glances of wealthy men who never saw her as more than part of the furniture. The walk from the subway to her building was lined with murals, faces of activists, poets, jazz legends. Harlem reminded her daily that greatness was not born of privilege, but of persistence. Her apartment sat on the fourth floor of a worn brownstone on 125th Street. The steps creaked under her shoes as she climbed, exhaustion tugging at her body, but she carried her dignity as carefully as the tray she had set down hours before at the plaza. She reached her door, paint peeling around the frame, and turned the brass knob that had long lost its shine. "Naomi? That you, child?" The voice was soft, yet edged with pain. Inside, Evelyn Carter sat in her recliner by the window, the glow of a small lamp painting her silver hair in golden light. Her grandmother had been Naomi's anchor since childhood, raising her when her mother drifted from job to job and eventually vanished altogether. Evelyn's hands, knotted by arthritis, rested atop a crocheted blanket she had made years earlier, each loop and thread a testament to endurance. "Yes, Grandma? It's me." Naomi dropped her bag near the couch and moved quickly to Evelyn's side. She knelt, adjusting the pillow behind her grandmother's back, then pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "How are the joints tonight?" Evelyn smiled through the stiffness of pain. "Like a rusty hinge, creaking at every move. But don't you worry about me. Tell me about your day, sugar." Naomi hesitated, her mind flashing back to Jonathan Blake's smirk, the laughter that followed, and then the stunned silence when she spoke Mandarin. She wanted to share it all, the sting of humiliation and the sudden triumph, but part of her still wrestled with whether it was prideful to speak of it. Instead, she said simply, "Work was eventful." Evelyn tilted her head, eyes sharp even in their age. "Eventful usually means something worth telling. Out with it." Naomi laughed softly. sinking onto the low stool beside her grandmother. Mr. Blake, the CEO I told you about, decided to make me the evening's entertainment. He mocked my accent in front of Mr. Chen. Evelyn's lips pressed thin. That man doesn't know good soil when he sees it. Mocking a voice is like mocking the roots of a tree. Foolish. Naomi's shoulders loosened at her grandmother's steady wisdom. I couldn't hold it in. I answered him. In Mandarin. The old woman blinked. Then a slow smile spread across her face, pride warming her eyes. Mandarin? Yes. I told him in front of everyone that accents don't define intelligence. Mr. Chen seemed surprised. Evelyn chuckled, the sound soft but triumphant. Well, I'll be. You see, Naomi, that education of yours is like gold buried in a field. People may trample the dirt, but the treasure stays safe until you uncover it. She reached out, her arthritic fingers brushing Naomi's cheek. Education is a treasure no one can steal. Those words had been Evelyn's refrain since Naomi was a child, when money was scarce, when bullies laughed at her southern drawl, when she studied late into the night by the dim light of borrowed lamps. It was Evelyn who taught her that knowledge was armor, and language was a key to doors that others tried to lock. Naomi glanced at the wall behind her grandmother. The paint was chipped, but the surface carried their legacy. There, in a simple frame, hung her diploma from Georgetown University, Master of Arts in International Business and Linguistics. Beside it, a photograph of her in cap and gown at Beijing Foreign Studies University, standing in a sea of students, her smile radiant beneath the Beijing sun. Most guests who visited their modest apartment never expected to find such credentials hanging above threadbare furniture. To Naomi, the wall was not decoration, but a shield against despair. Each time she returned from the plaza, uniform stiff with starch, dignity bruised by careless remarks, she looked at those frames and remembered who she truly was. Evelyn followed her gaze. Do you regret it, Naomi? All those years of studying, all those nights of ramen noodles and secondhand books? Sometimes I wonder if the world's been blind to what you carry. Naomi shook her head firmly. No regrets. Knowledge is never wasted. One day the right door will open. Tonight almost felt like the beginning of something. She rose and went into the small kitchen where a kettle sat on the stove. The apartment smelled faintly of chamomile tea and the lavender lotion Evelyn used for her aching joints. Naomi filled 2 mugs, bringing them back to the living room. As they sipped, Evelyn began telling stories. How she marched in civil rights rallies in the 1960s. How she worked 2 jobs to keep Naomi in school uniforms. How she once dreamed of becoming a teacher, but life had pulled her into factories instead. I see myself in you, Naomi, Evelyn whispered. But you carry it further. You have the gift of tongues, the patience of study, and the courage to speak truth even when men laugh. That's rare. Don't let them bury it under aprons. The words sank deep, like roots spreading in soil. Naomi felt her exhaustion fade, replaced by a quiet fire. Later, after Evelyn fell asleep, Naomi retreated to her small bedroom. The space was barely wide enough for her bed and a narrow desk, but on that desk lay the relics of her hidden life. Thick Mandarin dictionaries with worn edges, notes scribbled on trade law between the U.S. and China, and a battered copy of Sun Tzu's The Art of War in dual language print. She pulled one book close, Advanced Business Mandarin, Negotiation and Strategy, and opened to a page she had nearly memorized. Her eyes scanned the characters, lips moving silently as she rehearsed phrases about intellectual property rights, exclusive contracts, arbitration clauses. These were not the words of a waitress. They were the arsenal of a strategist. The sound of the city filtered through her thin window, the distant sirens, the thrum of traffic, a neighbor's radio playing faint blues. But inside, Naomi built her fortress of knowledge. She scribbled notes until her fingers cramped, her lamp burning past midnight, but she thought again of Jonathan Blake, his confident sneer cracking when she spoke Mandarin. She remembered Daniel Chen's eyes narrowing with sudden interest, and she wondered, had she, in that moment, been seen? The question lingered like incense in the air. At last, exhaustion won. Naomi closed her books, tucked them neatly into her drawer, and slid beneath the blanket her grandmother had crocheted. As sleep overtook her, she dreamed not of serving tables, but of boardrooms filled with voices speaking many tongues, English, Mandarin, Spanish, and of herself at the center, not as a shadow, but as a light. For in Harlem, in that small apartment, beneath the steady gaze of Evelyn Carter's wisdom, Naomi's invisible brilliance was beginning to burn. And the city, though it did not yet know, was about to feel its fire. The Plaza Hotel looked very different when you entered from the employee entrance. Gone were the grand chandeliers and marble floors. Instead, the walls were lined with dull beige paint, scuffed by carts and trays. Fluorescent bulbs flickered overhead, buzzing like tired bees, casting harsh light on a hallway where the glamour of New York's elite never reached. Naomi Carter knew both sides of this world. Upstairs, she balanced crystal glasses on silver trays for billionaires who barely noticed her presence. Down here, she was simply another uniformed worker with a number on the payroll sheet. Invisible, unless she made a mistake. She arrived early that morning, her hair pinned neatly, shoes polished despite their worn soles. Tony Ramirez, who worked in the dish pit, greeted her with a grin. His dark curls stuck out from beneath his cap, and steam from the industrial washer fogged the glass around him. "Morning, Naomi," he called, wiping his brow. "You look way too awake for someone who got home at midnight." Naomi smiled faintly. "Chamomile tea and stubbornness." Tony chuckled. "That's your secret weapon." She made her way to the locker room, a narrow space lined with dented metal doors. There, Bella Martinez was adjusting her makeup in the cracked mirror. Bella, the hostess, was always immaculate, lipstick perfectly applied, hair styled into soft waves that seemed effortless but took her nearly an hour. She turned and waved. "Naomi, you survived last night?" "Barely," Naomi replied, opening her locker. Inside, among the folded uniform pieces, was her secret, a copy of Advanced Business Mandarin tucked carefully beneath a spare apron. She traced its spine with her fingertips before slipping on her vest. Bella leaned closer. "I heard Blake was brutal." Naomi hesitated, then whispered, "He mocked my accent in front of Mr. Chen. I answered him back, in Mandarin." Bella's eyes widened. "You're kidding. What did he do?" "He froze. Everyone did." A grin spread across Bella's face. "Naomi, that's legendary. You realize what you did? Half the people upstairs couldn't order dumplings in Chinatown without embarrassing themselves. And you—" She lowered her voice. "You could run circles around them." Naomi shook her head, tugging her uniform into place. "It doesn't matter. Down here, I'm just a waitress. Invisible walls, Bella. They don't see what's behind them." Before Bella could reply, the locker room door creaked open. Mark Reynolds, the floor manager, stepped inside. Tall and lean, with a suit that was always too sharp for kindness, he carried a clipboard as though it were a weapon. His eyes narrowed at Naomi. "Carter." "Yes, sir?" She stood straighter, her voice polite. "You're not here to chat. You're here to serve. The plaza has standards, and part of those standards is knowing your place." He tapped his pen against the clipboard. "Last night, I heard you decided to speak out of turn." Naomi's stomach tightened. "Mr. Reynolds, I was only responding—" "You don't respond," he cut in, his tone icy. "You pour, you smile, you disappear. That's your role. His eyes swept over her as though she were a smudge on the glass. If you want to play translator, apply at the UN. Otherwise, keep your mouth shut. He turned sharply and left, leaving the door swinging behind him. Silence hung heavy for a moment. Bella muttered something in Spanish under her breath, her eyes flashing with anger. Tony, who had drifted closer, shook his head. "Guy's a snake," Tony said. "He's scared of you, Naomi. That's why he's trying to box you in." Naomi forced a small smile. "Doesn't matter. He's right about one thing. I'm not at the UN, I'm here." But inside, her heart burned. Every word Reynolds had spoken was another brick in the wall that kept her from stepping beyond the service corridor into the world she had studied for. She had spent years building knowledge, yet one man with a clipboard could reduce her to silence. As the shift began, Naomi moved through the grand dining room, the invisible wall between guest and staff rising taller with every polished plate she set down. She caught glimpses of Jonathan Blake at another table, laughing loudly with investors, as though last night's moment had never rattled him. He didn't glance her way. Invisible. She kept her head down, her movements graceful but unnoticed. Her mind drifted to her grandmother's words. Education is a treasure no one can steal. But what use was treasure if it stayed buried? Hours later, during a short break, Naomi returned to the locker room. She opened her locker and pulled out her book. The characters on the page felt like an anchor in the storm. She whispered phrases softly under her breath, rolling the tones with precision. Business clauses, negotiation idioms, the cultural concept of guangxi, relationships that bound business and respect in Chinese society. Her lips formed another phrase when the door creaked. She shoved the book back quickly, but Tony had already seen it. "Naomi," he said quietly, "you're hiding a sword in a broom closet. Why keep it locked up?" "Because if Reynolds finds out, I'll lose even this job." Tony leaned against the lockers, crossing his arms. "You think Reynolds owns your future? He can't even manage a seating chart without panicking. You've got more in your head than half the people dining upstairs." Naomi closed her eyes, steadying her breath. "It's not about him. It's about timing. You don't swing a sword unless the battle's worth it." Tony grinned. "Then when the time comes, you better swing hard." Bella entered then, her heels clicking, a stack of menus in her hands. "You two plotting revolutions again?" Tony smirked. "Just reminding Naomi she's got more fire than she lets on." Bella set down the menus and leaned close. "Listen, Naomi. They want you silent because silence keeps them comfortable. But don't you dare bury yourself. The moment will come, I can feel it." Naomi smiled faintly, grateful for her friends. Down here, beneath the glittering chandeliers, they were her small circle of truth. That evening, as the shift ended, Naomi stepped out into the crisp night air. Harlem waited miles north, her grandmother's lamp glowing like a beacon. But here, outside the plaza, she paused. She stared up at the lit windows above, the boardrooms where contracts were signed, the suites where billionaires toasted to power. Invisible walls kept her out, but she felt the stirrings of something stronger than walls, the certainty that one day her voice would break through, and she whispered to herself, in Mandarin, a phrase that had carried her through exams and long nights of doubt. Even the voiceless can change the world. The words faded into the night, but Naomi carried them home, a secret flame that no humiliation could extinguish. The Plaza Hotel's ballroom glowed like a palace that night. Crystal chandeliers cascaded light across gilded moldings, the walls alive with echoes of laughter and the clinking of cutlery. At the center, a long banquet table stretched like a runway of power, lined with silver cutlery, porcelain plates rimmed in gold, and glasses that seemed to sparkle with every toast. It was the night of the billion-dollar dinner, a meeting meant to secure one of the largest technology agreements between East and West. Blake Global had arranged everything to impress. Imported wines, aged scotch, and chefs flown in from Paris. But beneath the glitter, currents of rivalry, suspicion, and hunger for control coursed invisibly. Naomi Carter stood at the edge of the room, balancing a tray of champagne flutes. Her uniform was spotless, her posture perfect. On the surface, she was just another server, but inside her mind was alert, every sense sharpened. Since the humiliation 2 nights ago, she had become more cautious, but also more curious. She knew this dinner was not just about food. It was about power. At the head of the table, Jonathan Blake exuded confidence. He was a man who thrived in spectacle. To his left sat Daniel Chen of Han Innovations, a guest of honor who carried himself with quiet dignity. Chen was no ordinary businessman. His rise from a modest background in Guangzhou to one of China's most powerful tech leaders was legendary. His presence at the plaza was both a prize and a threat. Jonathan's smile gleamed as he raised his glass. Gentlemen, tonight we celebrate more than a partnership. We celebrate the fusion of vision, Han Innovations and Blake Global. Together, we will set the future of artificial intelligence. Applause followed, though Naomi noticed Chen's hands remained folded. His expression betrayed nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. As the courses unfolded, lobster bisque, filet mignon, and truffle risotto. Naomi moved quietly between the tables. She poured, cleared, and replaced, her ears tuned not only to requests for wine, but to the undercurrents of conversation. "Tell me, Mr. Chen," Jonathan said with exaggerated warmth, "what does success look like in your eyes? Here in New York, we say bigger is always better, but perhaps in Beijing, the philosophy differs?" Chen's eyes narrowed slightly. "Success, Mr. Blake, is harmony, growth that respects balance. We do not measure it only in numbers." Jonathan laughed, waving his hand as though brushing off a quaint proverb. "Balance is good for yoga, not business. In this room, numbers win." The table chuckled politely, but Naomi felt a sharp sting at the casual dismissal. She thought of her own studies in cross-cultural negotiations, the concept of face in Chinese society, the delicacy of respect. Jonathan was trampling through a field of glass with heavy boots. As she refilled a glass near the far end of the table, Naomi caught snippets of conversation between 2 of Blake's senior executives. They leaned close, their voices hushed, but her ear, sharpened by habit, caught the words. "Hidden clause in Section 14. Exclusivity for 5 years. They'll never catch it." Her hand stilled for a fraction of a second before she continued pouring. Algorithm rights. It locks Han Innovations out of U.S. markets unless they sell patents outright. Naomi's pulse quickened. She knew enough about contracts to understand. Blake Global was planting a trap. On the surface, the agreement promised cooperation, but hidden in the fine print was a clause that would strip Chen's company of autonomy, essentially handing Blake Global control over their groundbreaking algorithms. She straightened, her face neutral. The men never noticed her pause. To them, she was invisible. Later, as the main course was served, Jonathan clapped his hands for attention. "And now, to honor our guests, a toast with the finest single malt scotch in New York." Naomi stiffened. She knew enough about Chinese business etiquette to recognize the insult. In Chinese tradition, baijiu or tea ceremonies carried meaning. Forcing strong Western liquor in place of these rituals dismissed culture for dominance. Chen accepted the glass politely, but his lips barely touched the rim. The insult hung heavy in the air. Jonathan raised his voice. "Let us drink to the future, A future written in bold American ink. Applause thundered again, though less warmly. Naomi's heart pounded. She wanted to scream that respect was not a game, that negotiations were not conquests. But she bit her tongue, slipping back into the shadows, her mind burning with the knowledge of the trap she had overheard. Hours passed, the dinner winding toward its close. Plates were cleared, and conversations grew quieter, heavier. Jonathan leaned closer to Chen, his voice carrying just enough for Naomi, stationed nearby, to hear. Our lawyers will send the final draft tomorrow, just a formality. Sign it, and the doors of Wall Street open wide for Han Innovations. Refuse, and, well, let's just say competition is not kind. Chen's expression was carved from stone, but his silence was not agreement. Naomi's chest tightened. She wanted to step forward to warn him. But who was she? A waitress in a borrowed uniform. To speak now would be to risk everything. Her job, her livelihood, her grandmother's fragile security. Yet as she gathered empty glasses, her hand brushed against the book hidden in her apron pocket. She had slipped it there earlier, a talisman she carried into long shifts. Advanced Business Mandarin. The pages she had studied whispered back to her now, reminding her of the principles she knew by heart. Fairness, transparency, respect. Naomi lifted her gaze. Daniel Chen caught her eye for a brief moment, and though his face remained composed, she thought she saw the faintest question flicker there. Who are you? Her throat tightened. She bowed her head quickly, stepping back into invisibility. By midnight, the dinner was over. Guests filed out, their laughter echoing through the gilded hall. Jonathan basked in the glow of his triumph, shaking hands, promising fortunes. Chen left quietly, his entourage at his side, his silence unreadable. Naomi remained until the last glass was cleared, the last crumb swept from the table. She stacked dishes, polished silver, and carried trays back through the staff corridors. In the locker room, she sat alone for a moment, the weight of what she had overheard pressing down on her. The billion-dollar dinner had not been a celebration. It had been a snare, woven in fine print and arrogance. She pulled out her book, flipping to the section on contract language. Her finger traced the characters for exclusive rights, for intellectual property, for arbitration. She whispered the words aloud, her voice steady, as though practicing for a battle that had not yet begun. And in the quiet of that fluorescent-lit room, Naomi Carter made a vow. She would not let Blake Global's deception go unchecked. Invisible or not, she had seen the trap. And soon she would find a way to speak. The Plaza Hotel never truly slept. By morning, fresh flowers replaced wilted bouquets, crystal goblets sparkled as though untouched, and the ballroom carried no trace of the billion-dollar dinner that had ended just hours before. But for Naomi Carter, the weight of what she had overheard the night before clung to her like a second skin. All morning she served guests in silence, her mind circling the same thought. If Daniel Chen signs that contract, Han Innovations is finished in America. Blake Global's hidden clause was a weapon disguised as partnership. She had studied enough international business law to recognize the trap. Yet what could she do? She was a waitress with a borrowed uniform and a grandmother who depended on her wages. To speak was to risk everything. By evening, the plaza prepared for another private dinner. The chandeliers glowed golden once more, and the air brimmed with the sound of anticipation. Tonight would be smaller, more intimate. Just Jonathan Blake, Daniel Chen, and a handful of senior executives. The final stage before the contract was signed. Naomi's stomach twisted as she buttoned her vest in the staff locker room. Bella Martinez gave her a long look. "You look pale," Bella said softly. "What's wrong?" Naomi hesitated. She couldn't reveal the secret clause, not yet. but her voice betrayed her fear. Something about tonight. It matters more than anyone knows. Bella squeezed her hand. Then be careful. But don't let them silence you. Naomi nodded, though doubt gnawed at her. She slipped her book, Advanced Business Mandarin, into her apron pocket, as though its presence could grant her courage. When she entered the dining room, Jonathan Blake was already seated at the head of the table, his posture a throne of confidence. Daniel Chen sat across from him, composed as ever, though his eyes betrayed an alertness Naomi had begun to recognize. Around them, executives buzzed with forced laughter, their voices masking the tension that ran beneath the polished surface. The dinner unfolded smoothly at first. Naomi poured tea and wine, moving silently between the seats. The executives toasted to partnership, their words dripping with flattery. Jonathan spoke of profits and dominance. Chen spoke of cooperation and balance. Two philosophies clashed quietly across the tablecloth. But when the moment came for Jonathan to unveil the final contract, Naomi's heart nearly stopped. A sleek leather folder was placed before Chen, its papers neatly arranged. Jonathan leaned forward, his smile sharp. All that remains, Mr. Chen, is your signature. With it, the future belongs to us both. Naomi froze beside the table, tray balanced in her hands. Her eyes flicked to the document. She couldn't read the clauses from here, but she knew what hid inside. Her pulse hammered against her ribs. Chen scanned the papers carefully, his brow furrowing. He turned a page, then another, his silence stretching long. Jonathan shifted in his seat, impatience creeping into his tone. It's all standard legal language. Nothing unusual. Trust me, my lawyers are the best on Wall Street. Naomi felt heat rise in her chest. She remembered her grandmother's words. Education is a treasure no one can steal. What good was that treasure if she let this moment pass? She swallowed hard, her voice trembling in her throat. Then she whispered, in flawless Mandarin, just loud enough for Daniel Chen to hear, 第14条延长陷阱，小心. Article 14 hides a trap. Be careful. The words slipped from her lips like a secret carried on air. Chen's head lifted, his eyes darting to her. For the first time, his composed mask cracked ever so slightly. He glanced down again, flipping to section 14. His gaze sharpened. Jonathan noticed the shift. Something wrong, Mr. Chen? Chen's voice was calm but edged with steel. This clause, exclusive rights to algorithms, for 5 years? The room stiffened. Executives shifted uncomfortably. Jonathan forced a laugh. A formality. Standard practice. Don't let the jargon worry you. But Chen cut him off. No, Mr. Blake. This is not formality. This is theft. He pushed the contract away. Silence crashed over the table. Jonathan's smile faltered. I assure you nothing was hidden. Naomi felt every eye turn toward her. Chen's gaze lingered, as though weighing something unseen. Finally, he spoke, this time in Mandarin, his tone deliberate. You warned me. Who are you? Naomi's hands trembled around the tray, but her voice was steady. A waitress and a scholar. Gasps rippled through the room. Jonathan's face darkened. What nonsense is this? Carter, step outside. But Chen raised his hand, silencing him. No, she stays. Jonathan's jaw clenched, fury flashing in his eyes. She's staff. Nothing more. Chen's gaze never wavered from Naomi. Sometimes truth comes from those the world ignores. Naomi lowered her eyes, her heart pounding, but she knew retreat was no longer possible. She stepped forward, speaking in Mandarin and English, her voice firm. This clause violates international trade law. Under U.S.-China agreements, Intellectual property rights cannot be seized through exclusivity clauses hidden in cooperation contracts. If Mr. Chen signed, Blake Global would hold control over Han Innovation's algorithms, illegal under arbitration standards. The executives shifted uneasily, glancing at one another. Jonathan slammed his hand against the table. "You dare lecture me on law? You're a waitress!" Naomi met his fury with quiet resolve. "I'm a graduate of Georgetown. I studied these laws in Beijing, and I will not be silent when deception hides in plain sight." The room erupted into chaos. Some executives whispered frantically. Others stared at Naomi as though seeing her for the first time. Chen, however, remained calm, his eyes steady on hers. After a long pause, he spoke. "Miss Carter, please sit." The words stunned the room. Jonathan's voice dripped with disbelief. "You cannot be serious." Chen's tone sharpened. "I am. If Miss Carter can see what your lawyers attempted to hide, then she deserves a seat at this table. Consider her my linguistic and cultural advisor." Jonathan's face flushed crimson. His empire of control was crumbling in front of him, and the cause was a woman he had humiliated days earlier. Naomi's hands trembled as she lowered her tray and slid into the empty chair beside Chen. Her heart thundered, but her voice was steady. She spoke softly in Mandarin, guiding Chen through the nuances of the contract, pointing out each clause that masked coercion. Her words carried precision, each legal term chosen with care. Chen listened intently, nodding, his respect growing with every phrase. By the end of the dinner, the contract lay untouched. Chen closed the folder and looked Jonathan Blake in the eye. "Blake Global will not dictate terms. If we partner, it will be as equals. Otherwise, there is no partnership." Jonathan forced a smile, but it faltered under the weight of defeat. He turned his glare on Naomi, but she met it calmly. For once, she was no longer invisible. As the guests departed, Chen paused by Naomi's side. In Mandarin, he whispered, "Your courage saved me tonight. Remember this, talent speaks louder than titles." Naomi bowed her head, gratitude burning in her chest. For the first time in years, she felt the invisible walls crack. And as she stepped back into the staff corridor, her hands still shaking, she realized something. Her voice, whispered in Mandarin, had just changed the course of billion-dollar negotiations. The towers of Manhattan gleamed like spears of glass, catching the morning sun in sharp, merciless angles. At the heart of it all, Blake Global's headquarters stood like a fortress, 50 stories of steel and ambition rising above the city's clamor. Inside, boardrooms buzzed with speculation, corridors whispered with rumor, and the name Naomi Carter floated like an unexpected storm cloud. For decades, Jonathan Blake had controlled every narrative in those walls. Deals rose and fell at his command. Board members bowed to his charisma. But today, the storm Naomi had ignited at the plaza threatened to unravel that order. Naomi's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the lapels of her old gray suit. It wasn't new. In fact, it was the same suit she had worn for her thesis defense years ago at Georgetown. The fabric was worn at the edges, but it carried with it the memory of triumph. The day she had stood before professors, defending her mastery of Mandarin and international trade law. She clung to that memory now as armor, and Tony and Bella had seen her off that morning. "Go knock them dead," Tony had whispered, grinning despite his worry. Bella had hugged her fiercely, whispering, "You're not invisible anymore." Now, standing in the gilded lobby of Blake Global, Naomi felt the weight of her choice. Daniel Chen had insisted she attend the board meeting as his cultural and linguistic advisor. "Sometimes truth comes from the voices the world ignores," he had said. And so here she was, no longer a waitress in uniform, but a woman stepping into the lion's den. The elevator carried her to the top floor, its mirrored walls reflecting her steadying breaths. When the doors opened, she was met with the hush of power. Thick carpets, abstract art, the faint aroma of polished wood. A receptionist led her down the hall to the boardroom. Inside, the room was already ablaze with tension. Executives in dark suits sat in leather chairs, papers spread before them like battle maps. At the head of the long oak table sat Jonathan Blake, his jaw tight, his smile sharp as glass. Daniel Chen sat opposite him, calm and collected, as though the chaos around him were no more than background noise. He gave Naomi a slight nod as she entered, a silent reassurance. Blake's eyes flicked to her and narrowed. "Miss Carter," he said, his tone laced with disdain. "I see you've been invited as... what exactly? Translator? Waitress? Spy?" A ripple of laughter moved through the room, though uneasily. Naomi met his gaze evenly. "Advisor, language and cultural." Blake's smile thinned. "Interesting. We at Blake Global typically reserve that title for people with credentials, degrees, experience." Naomi did not flinch. "Georgetown University, Masters in International Business and Linguistics, 2 years of study in Beijing. I believe those count." The room shifted. Some executives leaned forward, intrigued. Others looked away, uncomfortable. Blake's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, but he quickly regained it. "Credentials," he said, waving a hand. "Paper on the wall. What matters is execution. And last night, Miss Carter, you embarrassed this company in front of our guest. You undermined me." Daniel Chen's voice cut through the tension, calm but firm. "She revealed the truth, a truth your lawyers chose to hide." Murmurs rippled through the board. One executive whispered, "Section 14," and another hissed back, "She wasn't supposed to know." Blake slammed his hand on the table. "Enough. Blake Global doesn't need lectures from a waitress. This is my company. These are my negotiations." Naomi inhaled slowly, remembering her grandmother's words. "Education is a treasure no one can steal." She straightened her back. "With respect, Mr. Blake," she said softly, but her voice carried, "Negotiations aren't yours to control. Not when deception poisons them. Respect is not weakness. And arrogance is not strength. In Chinese business culture, this is called mianzi, face. When you insult a partner's culture and hide traps in contracts, you don't gain face. You lose it." The room went silent. Several board members exchanged glances, whispers breaking out at the edges. Chen leaned forward, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp. "She is correct. In our culture, trust is capital. Without it, even billions collapse." Blake's face reddened. "You think I care about tea ceremonies and proverbs? This is Wall Street. We win or we die." Naomi's voice sharpened, the fire inside her uncoiling. "Then you've already lost. Because business is no longer a battlefield of conquest. It's a bridge. And if you burn it, you stand alone." A hush fell over the room. Even those loyal to Blake shifted uncomfortably. One board member, an older man with silver hair, cleared his throat. "Jonathan, if Section 14 truly violates international agreements, we could face legal repercussions." Another added, "And reputational damage. Investors will not forgive a scandal involving intellectual property theft." Blake's fist clenched. "You're siding with her? With her?" The silver-haired man's voice was calm. "We are siding with reason." The room erupted into debate, voices overlapping, papers shuffling, tempers rising. Naomi sat silently, her heart racing, but she knew the storm was necessary. Invisible walls were crumbling. Jonathan rose suddenly, his voice booming. "Fine. You want truth? Here's truth. Without me, this company is nothing. Without my deals, you're all just bureaucrats in suits. And without this contract, Han Innovations will never step foot in America. Chen rose slowly, his calm presence like steel under silk. You are mistaken. With deception, there is no contract. Without respect, there is no partnership. And without integrity, there is no future. He turned to Naomi, addressing her in Mandarin so the entire room could hear. You understand the soul of our culture. You saved this negotiation. Naomi bowed her head slightly, her throat tight with emotion. Blake's fury boiled over. This is my company, my board, and I will not let some girl from Harlem lecture me about the future of global trade. Naomi stood, her voice trembling but clear. I may be from Harlem. I may be a waitress. But last night I spoke the truth, and the truth saved you from destroying everything you built. That's the fire you're facing now, not me, not Mr. Chen, but the fire of your own arrogance. The boardroom fell into stunned silence. For the first time, Jonathan Blake had no words. The meeting ended in chaos, executives arguing among themselves, lawyers scribbling notes, whispers flying about Naomi's intervention. Chen shook her hand before leaving, his grip firm, his eyes respectful. You've given voice to what many were too afraid to say, he told her. As Naomi stepped out of Blake Global's fortress, the Manhattan skyline stretched before her. The walls that had kept her invisible were cracking, brick by brick. She had faced the fire, and though her hands still trembled, she knew one thing for certain. Her voice had power, and no one, not even Jonathan Blake, could silence it again. Wall Street shimmered with winter sunlight, its glass towers flashing like mirrors of ambition. Inside one of those towers, Han Innovations' New York branch, an air of quiet anticipation pulsed through the corridors. Daniel Chen had called for a private meeting, one that would change the trajectory of Naomi Carter's life. Naomi stood in the lobby, her palms damp against the handle of her old leather briefcase. The building was sleek, all steel and marble, a far cry from the worn stairwells of Harlem or the fluorescent-lit corridors of the plaza's staff wing. For the first time, she wasn't here to serve food. She was here as a guest. A young assistant led her to the 42nd floor, where floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline like living art. In the conference room, Daniel Chen sat at the head of the table, serene as ever, a cup of green tea steaming before him. He rose when Naomi entered, bowing his head slightly in greeting. Miss Carter, he said warmly, thank you for coming. Naomi inclined her head, her voice steady despite the whirlwind inside her. Thank you for inviting me, Mr. Chen. He gestured for her to sit. On the table lay a folder embossed with Han Innovations' seal. Its weight seemed to hum in the air. Chen leaned forward, his eyes keen. Last night and the night before, you showed not only courage but mastery, of language, of culture, and of truth. You prevented deception from staining what could have been a disastrous partnership. For that, I owe you my respect. Naomi's throat tightened. I only did what was right. That is why you are here. Chen slid the folder toward her. Han Innovations is expanding rapidly into global markets. We require someone who can bridge cultures, who can speak not only in languages, but in principles. I would like to offer you the position of Director of International Communications. The words struck Naomi like a thunderclap. Director. The title felt unreal, like something plucked from a dream she had buried years ago. She hesitated, her fingers brushing the edge of the folder. Mr. Chen, I'm honored, but you doubt if you belong. Chen's eyes softened. That is natural. You have been told your place is to be invisible. You've been laughed at, silenced. Yet when the moment came, your voice carried more weight than the men with power, That is belonging. Naomi blinked back the sting of tears. She thought of Evelyn in Harlem, her grandmother's voice whispering, "Education is a treasure no one can steal." Perhaps this was that treasure finally unlocking its door. Before she could speak, however, the conference room door swung open. Jonathan Blake strode in, his presence like a storm. His tailored navy suit gleamed, his jaw set in fury, masked as charm. Behind him trailed two of his senior executives, their faces taut. "Mr. Chen," Blake said smoothly, though his voice carried an edge. "I trust you'll forgive the intrusion, but this involves me as well." His eyes darted to Naomi, hard as flint. "And her." Naomi's breath caught. Chen remained seated, his composure unshaken. "This is my office, Jonathan. You are a guest here. Speak, then leave." Blake's smile was tight, his words sharp. "Miss Carter may have embarrassed me, but I recognize talent when I see it. I am here to extend an offer. Naomi, come back to the plaza, not as a waitress, as part of my communications team. I'll match whatever Chen offers and add more. Salary, benefits, visibility, all yours." The room froze. Naomi stared at him, disbelief coursing through her. The same man who had mocked her accent, who had humiliated her in front of investors, now stood offering her a seat at his table. Chen's eyes flicked between them, calm but watchful. Naomi found her voice. "Why?" Blake's jaw tightened. "Because you proved yourself. Because clearly you're wasted on carrying trays. And because I was wrong." The words scraped out of him like stones. "I underestimated you. That was my mistake." Naomi studied him. His apology was public, but not pure. It was strategy, a move to reclaim control. Still, there was a fracture in his pride, and through it, a glimmer of sincerity flickered. Chen folded his hands. "So this is the ultimatum. Miss Carter, two paths. With Han Innovations, you will help us build bridges across cultures. With Blake Global, you will help repair what was broken. The choice is yours." The weight of the moment pressed on Naomi like a stone. She saw two visions unfolding in her mind. In one, she returned to the plaza, working under Blake, perhaps carving space where none existed before. In the other, she joined Chen, stepping into a world she had dreamed of, yet one that meant leaving behind everything familiar. She thought of Evelyn, waiting in their Harlem apartment, her hands aching yet her spirit unbowed. She thought of Tony and Bella, who cheered her on in the fluorescent shadows. And she thought of the voice inside her that had whispered in Mandarin when silence would have been safer. Naomi rose slowly, her palms pressed flat on the table. She looked at Blake first. "You mocked me because of where I came from. You silenced me because it suited you, and now you stand here because I forced you to see me. I appreciate your apology, but I will not return to a place that only values me when it needs saving." Blake's face hardened, his pride stung. He opened his mouth, but Naomi turned to Chen before he could speak. "You saw me when I was invisible. You listened, and you trusted my words. Mr. Chen, I accept your offer." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then Chen nodded, satisfaction glinting in his eyes. "Then welcome, Director Carter." Blake's fists clenched at his sides, but he said nothing. He turned sharply on his heel, storming out with his executives trailing behind. The door closed with a final echo. Naomi exhaled, her knees weak. Chen smiled gently. "You chose not only with your mind, but with your heart. That is the mark of true leadership." She sat again, tears threatening but her voice strong. "I won't waste this chance. I want to use it to give others the voice I almost lost." Chen lifted his cup of tea, offering a toast. Then let this be the beginning. Naomi touched her water glass to his teacup, her heart pounding with both fear and exhilaration. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer only a waitress or even only a scholar. She was stepping into her future, on her own terms. Outside, Wall Street's towers gleamed as if in witness. The ultimatum had been given. The choice was made. And Naomi Carter, once mocked for her accent, once dismissed as nothing more than a server, walked out of Han Innovations that day carrying a title that was hers by merit, by courage, and by destiny: director. The Plaza Hotel looked the same as it always had. Its chandeliers still shimmered like constellations, the carpet's muffled footsteps with aristocratic grace, and the laughter of the powerful still floated across the grand dining room. But for Naomi Carter, the plaza was no longer the palace that once crushed her spirit. Tonight, it was the stage of her farewell. Han Innovations had officially announced her appointment as Director of International Communications. The news had rippled quietly but undeniably across Wall Street. A former waitress elevated overnight to a leadership role in a billion-dollar company. Some called it scandal, others inspiration. To Naomi, it felt like truth finally stepping into the light. And yet, she couldn't leave without looking back, without facing the place where her voice had first broken its silence. So she returned, not as an employee this time, but as a guest. She had booked a modest banquet room with her own money, not for investors or billionaires, but for the friends who had believed in her when she was invisible. The elevator doors opened, and Naomi stepped out wearing a simple navy dress, elegant but unpretentious. A small pendant hung at her neck, a gift from Evelyn years ago, etched with the words, "Strength in silence." Tonight, that silence was broken for good. Tony Ramirez was the first to arrive. He came in with his sleeves rolled, smelling faintly of dish soap, his smile wide. "Naomi," he exclaimed, pulling her into a bear hug. "Look at you, Director Carter, I knew it!" She laughed, warmth flooding her chest. "Tony, you believed before I did." "Damn right I did," he grinned. "You were never meant for the dish pit. You were meant for the sky." Bella Martinez swept in next, her red heels clicking, lipstick flawless as ever. She hugged Naomi fiercely, whispering, "Mija, you make us all proud. You showed them what invisible people can do." Naomi's eyes burned. "I couldn't have survived those nights without you two." They sat together at the table, the three of them laughing, reminiscing about shifts that had stretched past midnight, about Reynolds' petty rules, about the times they had dreamed of lives beyond the service corridors. Halfway through the evening, the door creaked open again, and there he was, Mark Reynolds. His usually stiff posture was bent tonight, his shoulders heavy. He lingered at the threshold, uncertain, his eyes darting around the room. Tony stiffened immediately. Bella crossed her arms, her expression hard. Naomi stood. "Mr. Reynolds." He cleared his throat. "Miss Carter, Naomi, I heard about your new position." "Director." He swallowed hard. "Congratulations." The words were grudging, but real. Tony muttered, "About time you said something decent." Reynolds ignored him, focusing on Naomi. "I may not have treated you fairly. I enforced the rules because that's what I was told to do. But I know I made you feel small. And I'm sorry." The room was quiet. Naomi studied him, her mind replaying the countless times he had silenced her, the sharp tone, the clipped orders. Yet she also saw the fear that had driven him, the fear of losing control in a world that demanded obedience from him as much as he demanded it from others. She nodded slowly. "I accept your apology." But understand this. I am no longer invisible. None of us are. Reynolds lowered his gaze. I know. Then he turned and left, the door closing softly behind him. Tony exhaled. Didn't think I'd live to see that. Bella smirked. Miracles happen, Tony. Naomi smiled faintly, but inside, she felt the chains breaking. The chains of silence, of humiliation, of being unseen. Reynolds's apology was not absolution, but it was proof. Even those who once dismissed her had been forced to acknowledge her worth. She raised her glass. To all of us. To Tony. To Bella. To everyone who's ever worked these halls unseen. We are no longer invisible. Their glasses clinked, the sound sharp and true. After dinner, Naomi lingered alone in the ballroom. The chandeliers glowed overhead, their light soft against the golden walls. She walked slowly across the carpet, remembering the nights she had carried trays with trembling hands, the sting of Blake's laughter, the whisper she had dared to speak in Mandarin that had changed everything. She paused at the center of the room, lifted her chin, and whispered aloud, I'm no longer invisible. The words echoed faintly, as if the walls themselves acknowledged her transformation. When she returned to Harlem later that night, Evelyn was waiting in her chair by the window, her blanket pulled up to her chin. Naomi knelt beside her, tears in her eyes. Grandma, she whispered, I did it. I walked back into the plaza, not as a server, but as myself. They saw me, truly saw me. Evelyn's hand, fragile but steady, cupped her cheek. I told you, child. Education is a treasure no one can steal, and now you've spent it wisely. Naomi pressed her forehead to her grandmother's hand, her heart swelling. For the first time, the weight of her journey lifted. The plaza had once been a cage. Tonight, it was a memory. The chains had broken, and Naomi Carter was free. Midtown Manhattan pulsed with a different rhythm than Wall Street. If Wall Street was about the weight of numbers and iron ambition, Midtown was about the air of creativity. Glass towers rising above bustling streets, neon signs colliding with sunlight, taxis weaving in endless streams. It was here, in the heart of the city, that Han Innovations had chosen to establish its American headquarters. And it was here that Naomi Carter arrived for her first day as Director of International Communications. She stepped out of the elevator onto the 40th floor and paused, the sight before her stealing her breath. The office stretched wide, lined with glass walls that overlooked the city skyline. The Empire State Building stood proud in the distance, its spire gleaming in the morning light. Inside, the space was open, modern and filled with quiet energy. Naomi carried a small box in her arms. Inside were the objects that told her story, her Georgetown diploma, the photograph from her graduation in Beijing, and a framed picture of Evelyn smiling in her armchair at home. As she placed them on the polished wooden desk, now bearing a nameplate that read, Naomi Carter, Director, she felt a swell of pride she had never dared to imagine. This was not the cramped staff locker at the plaza. This was hers. She sat for a moment, her fingers tracing the edges of Evelyn's picture. We made it, Grandma, she whispered. We're here. The office phone buzzed. It was Daniel Chen's assistant, requesting Naomi's presence in the main boardroom. She straightened her suit jacket, took a steadying breath, and walked down the corridor. Inside, the boardroom was alive with preparation. Screens glowed with charts, interpreters hovered, and staff moved with quiet urgency. At the center sat Daniel Chen, serene as ever, sipping tea. He motioned for Naomi to join him. Director Carter, he greeted, his voice carrying both respect and reassurance. Today, You present your first initiative." Naomi's pulse quickened. She had spent nights sketching the framework, drawing from her own scars, from the years of invisibility she endured. She called it the Hidden Voices Program, a corporate initiative to identify, mentor, and elevate employees from marginalized or overlooked backgrounds, giving them pathways into leadership. When her turn came, she rose. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied with each word. "Too often," she began, "talent hides behind aprons, behind dish pits, behind accents that are mocked instead of celebrated. I know, because I was one of those voices. This program will ensure that those who carry brilliance but lack privilege will not be left unseen. We will mentor them, train them, and give them the platform to lead." She switched seamlessly into Mandarin, then into Spanish, demonstrating the program's multilingual reach. Her words carried across the room like a bridge, each language an invitation. When she finished, silence filled the boardroom. Then applause rose, first from Chen, then from others. Even the skeptical faces softened. "Brilliant," Chen said simply. "This is not only business, this is legacy." Naomi exhaled, relief and pride flooding her. She had spoken not as a guest in someone else's world, but as a leader shaping her own. But across town, another audience was listening. Jonathan Blake sat in his penthouse office at Blake Global, the city sprawling beneath him. His executives had just returned from the Han Innovations press briefing, where Naomi's program had been announced. Reports flooded his desk, praising her initiative, lauding her as a symbol of hope. Blake's jaw tightened as he read. For years, he had dictated narratives. Now, Naomi Carter, the woman he had mocked, was rewriting them without him. His assistant entered quietly. "Sir, you've been invited to attend the Global Business Ethics Conference next week. Han Innovations is presenting." Blake's lips curled into something between a sneer and a grimace. "So she wants the world stage now?" He slammed the report shut. "Then let's see how she handles the fire." Back in Midtown, Naomi spent the afternoon walking the floor, greeting new staff, shaking hands with interns, listening to their stories. She made a point to remember names, to look people in the eye, things that had once been denied to her. At her desk, she placed Evelyn's picture prominently beside her diplomas. It wasn't just decoration. It was declaration. Every choice, every word, was for the woman who had raised her with wisdom stronger than any fortune. That evening, after the office had quieted, Naomi stayed behind. She gazed out at the skyline, lights blooming across the city like constellations. She remembered the laughter at the plaza, the sting of being silenced, the trembling courage of whispering Mandarin. And now, here she was. Her phone buzzed with a message from Bella. "Proud of you, mija. The plaza feels emptier without you, but brighter because of you." Another from Tony. "Still washing dishes. But now when I do, I tell everyone I used to work with the director. Don't forget us." Naomi smiled, tears pricking her eyes. "Never," she whispered. "Never invisible again." The next morning, preparations began for the upcoming Global Business Ethics Conference. Naomi would present the Hidden Voices program not only to investors, but to a worldwide audience. She rehearsed tirelessly, her words refined, her translations flawless. Each time she practiced, she imagined Evelyn's voice, steady and warm. Education is a treasure no one can steal. On the day of the conference, Naomi stood backstage, her heart pounding as lights blazed on the grand stage. Beyond the curtain, hundreds of business leaders, journalists, and students waited. Among them, she knew, was Jonathan Blake. When her name was announced, Director Naomi Carter, Han Innovations, she stepped into the light. The applause thundered. She began in English, her voice calm but strong. She spoke of hidden voices, of the need for equity and opportunity. Then she shifted into Mandarin, her cadence precise, her message clear: respect builds bridges. Finally, she spoke in Spanish, the words flowing with warmth. Inclusivity makes strength. By the time she finished, the hall was silent, then erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, pens scratched furiously across notepads. Naomi bowed her head slightly, her chest swelling with both relief and pride. At the edge of the audience, Jonathan Blake sat frozen, his face pale. The girl he once mocked had risen beyond his reach, and for the first time, he felt something he had never allowed before: humility. As Naomi left the stage, Chen greeted her with a bow. "Talent speaks all languages," he said, "and today, the world listened." Naomi's eyes glistened. She thought of Harlem, of Evelyn waiting by the window, of Tony and Bella still carrying trays under chandeliers. This was for them, for everyone who had been told they were invisible. She had built her new office in Midtown, but her true office was larger than any building. It was every voice she had chosen to lift. The Global Business Ethics Conference was held at the Jacob Javits Center in New York, a glass and steel cathedral of ideas that rose above the Hudson like a prism catching the sun. Inside, banners stretched across vast halls, flags of many nations fluttered, and interpreters bustled with headsets, their voices weaving a symphony of languages. Naomi Carter stood backstage, her palms cool against the folder she carried. This wasn't just another business summit. It was the stage where the world would see her, hear her, and judge whether her voice carried weight beyond the plaza, beyond Han Innovations, beyond the invisible walls she had shattered. The hall was packed. CEOs in tailored suits, professors in tweed, journalists with notepads, and students clutching programs filled the rows. Cameras lined the aisles, lenses waiting to magnify every word. In the front row sat Daniel Chen, his calm eyes steady, his presence like a pillar of reassurance. Beside him, Naomi spotted Bella and Tony, beaming proudly. And further back, alone, his expression carved in stone, sat Jonathan Blake. Naomi closed her eyes, inhaling slowly. She remembered Evelyn's voice. "Education is a treasure no one can steal." She remembered the sting of laughter at the plaza, the whisper in Mandarin that had turned a negotiation on its head, the apology Reynolds had given with shame in his eyes. Every thread of her journey had led to this moment. The announcer's voice rang out. "Please welcome to the stage, Director of International Communications at Han Innovations, Naomi Carter." Applause swelled like a wave. Naomi stepped forward, her heels clicking against the stage, the lights dazzling. She stood at the podium, hands resting lightly on the wood, and let the silence settle. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice low but sure, "I stand before you as someone who was not supposed to be here." Murmurs rippled through the hall. Naomi continued. "Not long ago, I was a waitress at the Plaza Hotel. Invisible, mocked for my accent, told to serve quietly and disappear. But education, as my grandmother taught me, is a treasure no one can steal. And tonight, I want to share what that treasure has taught me, that talent speaks all languages." Her words rang clear. She paused, then shifted seamlessly into Mandarin. "Talent is not divided by class, by accent, or by birthplace. True strength lies in the diversity of language and respect." Gasps and nods spread through the Mandarin-speaking delegation. Naomi's cadence carried the precision of Beijing classrooms, the resonance of lived truth. Then, without missing a beat, she turned to Spanish. "El talento no se mide por la riqueza, ni por el apellido, ni por la ciudad donde nacimos. Cada voz cuenta. Cada idioma abre una puerta que antes estaba cerrada. Talent is not measured by wealth, nor by surname, nor by the city of our birth. Every voice matters. Every language opens a door that was once closed. The Spanish-speaking delegation broke into applause mid-sentence, unable to hold back. Naomi smiled gently and returned to English. This is the vision of the Hidden Voices program. To find the talents hidden in kitchens, in fields, in forgotten classrooms. To lift those voices and let them shape the future. Because when we listen across languages, across cultures, across divides, we do more than make deals. We make history. The hall was silent. Then the applause began. First a ripple, then a roar, rising like thunder. People stood, clapping, cheering, some with tears in their eyes. Cameras flashed wildly. Naomi's chest ached with emotion, but she held her composure, bowing her head slightly before stepping back from the podium. Backstage, Daniel Chen met her with a bow. "You did not speak to the room," he said softly. "You spoke to the world." Tony and Bella rushed in, hugging her tight. "You killed it, Naomi!" Tony exclaimed, his eyes shining. Bella added, "Mija, you didn't just speak. You lifted us all." Naomi laughed through her tears, overwhelmed with gratitude. But one figure lingered at the edge of the stage, Jonathan Blake. His hands were in his pockets, his jaw tense, his eyes unreadable. He approached slowly. And for a moment, Naomi braced herself for another barb, another dismissal. Instead, he spoke quietly, almost wearily. "You've won, Naomi. I fought to silence you, but you were louder than my empire. And the truth is, you deserved to be. You're everything I pretended to be." Naomi studied him, her voice calm. "It was never about winning, Jonathan. It was about being heard. You silenced people because you feared their voices would challenge yours. But the world is changing. One voice no longer owns the future." His shoulders sagged. For once, there was no retort. He only nodded, turned, and walked away, diminished not by her triumph, but by the reflection of his own emptiness. That evening, Naomi returned home to Harlem. Evelyn was waiting, as always, in her chair by the window, the city lights painting her silver hair in a halo. Naomi knelt beside her, laying her head gently against her grandmother's knee. "Grandma," she whispered, tears spilling freely now. "They listened. All of them. They listened." Evelyn's eyes glistened as she stroked her granddaughter's hair. "I told you, child. Education is a treasure no one can steal. And you've turned that treasure into a gift for the world." Naomi smiled through her tears. "I couldn't have done it without you." Evelyn kissed her forehead. "The world will remember your voice, but I will always remember your heart." Naomi sat back, gazing out the window at the lights of New York. She thought of the plaza, of the staff corridors where she once hid books, of the chain that had bound her to invisibility. She thought of Tony and Bella, still carrying trays but carrying themselves taller now, because they had seen one of their own rise. She thought of Jonathan Blake, walking away into the night, perhaps changed, perhaps not. And she thought of every child somewhere, holding a book in their hands, dreaming of a future no one believed they could reach. "Talent speaks all languages," Naomi whispered into the quiet. And for the first time in her life, she felt not like a servant, not even like a director, but like a flame. Small, perhaps, but bright enough to light the way for others. And so, Naomi Carter's journey came full circle. From the hushed corners of the plaza's staff corridors to the illuminated stage of a global conference, she proved that true worth is never measured by status or accent, but by courage, resilience, and the willingness to speak when silence is demanded. She was once invisible. Now, she is unforgettable. Her story is not only hers, it belongs to every hidden voice waiting for its moment, every dream nurtured in quiet, every soul told you don't belong, who dares to answer, yes, I do. If her voice could rise from a whisper in Mandarin to an anthem heard across nations, so can yours. Thank you, dear friends, for staying with us until the very end of this healing journey. Your presence here is what turns words into firelight and stories into shared hope. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and join us for more journeys like this, where the invisible becomes seen, the forgotten are remembered, and every voice finds its place.